Yeah. Everyone, this is Katie Wurst. I'm going to just give you a brief a bio of Katie. Katie has been a coach for nearly 15 years, maybe more at this point. Katie, that spans youth, college, and professional programs. Katie is currently the head women's rugby coach at Queen's University of Charlotte, and champion, a national champion. Won the USA Rugby Collegiate Sevens Championships, where they won the Shield Championship. Katie has spent time coaching at University of Colorado, University of Minnesota, Elon University, University of South Carolina, and at the professional level, Katie was the national team coach for the Lao Rugby Federation, and was also the youth coach and program manager for Shannon Rugby Club in Limerick, Ireland. Has held an array of positions with USA Rugby, game development officer, youth development officer, and is now the coaching course leader and World Rugby coach educator. Um, I consider Katie a role model, and it's fantastic to have you on board with us, Katie. Katie's, I mean, competitive experience is remarkable. Toured with Munster internationally in France. Has been to the Asian Women's Sevens Championships and the 15s Championships, and in the international competition in Lao Nagas. Katie's education was done at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse, where she got a bachelor's in sports management with a minor in strength and conditioning, and then got a master's from the University of Minnesota in sport and exercise physiology, psychology with a minor in prevention science, and is currently working in a doctorate of education in kinesiology. So that's you can see that's a very impressive resume. And so, Katie, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm really thrilled to be here. So thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about coaching in quite an interesting time, a time when inclusion matters more than anything for so many reasons. And I'm also really excited to work with you on this project to talk and interact with everybody that is in attendance. So I hope it's not just going to be me kind of talking about different things, but I'd love some dialogue back and forth because that's the best way to be a player-centered coach. So happy to kind of take the lead on the direction that you would like to go and chat about anything that's of interest. So I always like to start with what are people really interested in learning since we have 30 minutes?
Maybe I can get us started while other people type up questions. And everyone, please type your questions in the chat window and I will relay them to Katie. Katie, you developed this program, right? You got it started at Queen's University in Charlotte. That's at least what my understanding is. How, coming to this from an inclusion and a justice standpoint, tell me, like, what are the procedures and what are the processes that you went through as you got this program rolling?
Well, I'll talk about how the element, and I'd love to see all the questions coming through. So you pick the ones that you love the most. So I'm going to say that, yes, this program, we were really fortunate to be able to start. And when we began the program, I was actually in the midst of finishing my dissertation for my doctorate, which actually was focused on cultural competence in international sport populations. So it was really looking at how do you start a brand new program from scratch, where we didn't have a single student athlete that had ever heard of the sport of rugby on campus, and we didn't own a single rugby ball. And I had about 3 months to figure out what to do to get the program started on all fronts. And we were able to recruit actually 25 student athletes from the beginning, most of which came from our campus environment. We are a very small campus. So really cultivating relationships with individuals from a long time of being involved in the sport is what made it all happen in a short amount of time. So the relationship building, the empathy, everything that you do to be a player-centered coach is what ultimately saved me in a very short span of time to be able to get things going and moving in the right direction. So, and now we're up to 61 female student athletes alone who identify as female. And they come from all over, including as far away as Africa and beyond. And a big part of the research that I was actually doing during my dissertation was understanding how to look at cultural competence. So kind of thinking about the 4 features of cultural competence is always how I frame what I do as a coach. So what is the awareness of your own personal cultural worldview? So what do you know about yourself? So there's always the common phrase of know thyself. So being able to know what are your potential biases, what are the things that you identify with. Do you really know truly who you are? Because then that can help you interact with other individuals. Also looking at what are the ingrained attitudes towards cultural differences across the spectrum. So where have you geographically been born? What are some of those experiences that you've had? How do those shape the way you perceive or view or have biases towards individual athletes that are part of your program? Then are you willing and able and have access to knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews? And then the last one is really generating cross-cultural skills. And I'd say the best way for the cross-cultural skills are to immerse yourself in as many different environments as possible. So on a personal quest, as you saw kind of from some of the things in my biography, to coach as many places, locations, groups, levels, experiences. So just by being here and tuning in today and being a part of this is part of that journey. So I think that's critically important to look at, however many different groups you can coach. We tend to be pretty comfortable with coaching the groups we know, but when you go outside of the groups that we know or the individuals we know, that's when the real learning and expansion of who you are as a person and as a coach happens.
As a psychologist, I could go in so many directions with all of those points that you just read, especially the 4 points. But I'm going to defer to the members of the audience here. Both Gabriel Galucia and Joe Cruz asked a question I think are similar. Joe asked, how do we cultivate the pipeline for coaches from our own teams? And Gabriel asked, in an external format of that, what are the coaching training paths that USA Rugby offers?
Excellent. So one of the simplest things I think for me personally as a young female is when I was younger, I was really fortunate that I had coaches that removed barriers for me to participate and have access to coaching courses. One of the biggest ones always as a college student or young person was financial. Was I able to afford the cost of coach training and education? And then even if I was able to, scratch together the money to pay for it, did I feel like I belonged in the classroom where it was happening? And oftentimes I didn't. And I sort of made it a mission to work and within my role at USA Rugby to try to make sure that there are not just the same people in the room all the time. So one of the things that you can do is invite individuals. So you can remove the barrier by working to serve as hosts for the coach training and education course from USA Rugby. It is free to apply to do this. It is the world's greatest unknown fundraising opportunity. So when you host one of USA Rugby's coaching courses, they actually provide equipment for you to do the course. So when you think about budgeting, your line item on the budget to buy new training balls, that's money that you save from your own personal budget. And it's the best way also to serve your community. So if you look to USA Rugby's website, it'll have a link where you can actually apply to host the courses. And then you work with your regional administrators to set those up. Another thing is to cultivate within IGR more and more individuals that actually serve as coach educators and trainers. And that's something that I repeatedly say over and over in any room that I can to USA Rugby, that the same people can also be teaching the classes on a regular basis. So I think taking sort of that step to just serve as a host. So anybody who has a classroom or educational facility as an opportunity can make a big difference. It also can help your own club and then help the community wider. But the biggest thing is to invite individuals. Say, I think you'd be great at this, and put people in that role. And a number of individuals often say, I don't know if I'm ready, or I don't think I have the knowledge base. But overwhelmingly, people who are newer to the coaching realm ask the best questions and have the least number of biases that maybe people who've been coaching for years come into in the coach training and education courses. And that's also the point of going to the courses, is to learn new things. So I think there often is this idea that I need to know a certain amount of information before I take these certification courses. And I find that especially college students or other individuals that haven't had some of these experiences really make the classrooms the best. And IGR individuals that have taken the courses and where I host them on my campus, they absolutely ask the most enriching questions. And I think they challenge the ideas that a lot of people who might be in the same classrooms have had for a while.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I have a teammate, one of the captains of my team, who found out that I'm going to be teaching. I'm going to be co-teaching the level 200 in about in 20 days, and he was like, "Well, I don't know that I'm ready for it." I was like, "Dude, you've been playing for 12 years. You know, you know what the essentials are. This is going to like just teach you the like finesse, like the actual like nitty gritty of coaching, but you already know, you have the fundamentals, so just do it, right?
I
Um,
think it's kind of like
uh,
nobody, when you think about like classes in high school or college, really people are like, well, these are required courses. I'm going to take them. But nobody says, I'm not ready to take that class. And the same applies for coach
right.
certification, right? You register for the class and you take it. Except I think there often is the hesitation of,
Yeah.
and that hesitation comes from, is that environment inclusive? Is that environment one where they feel like all levels of individuals can participate and be heard and be seen? And that's something I think USA Rugby is really starting at. One of the things about COVID has given people pause and time to reevaluate things like, what does the diversity look like within our pool of people who are teaching training and education courses? So, and that's going to be something that we'll consistently talk about and hammer away at until change is made. And I think changes are starting to occur.
Katie, we have a question from the Baltimore Flamingos that says, "You mentioned player-centered coaching. What is that?"
It's a great question. So, player centered coaching, the best way to think about it is, are the activities, events, behaviors, different features of your club, are they built around the members? And that's the extended family of members, every individual, not just maybe those that are on the A side or any piece like that. When you even think about, sometimes within rugby, the older I get, the more I think about, is even A, B, and C talking about different levels and sides that you play. Is that the most inclusive practice, even though it's ingrained within what rugby talks about? Can you just be one team? Right? So can you select a team based on your opponent per each week? And it's something that we talk about a lot at the collegiate level as we start to grow more. So thinking about the teaching and coaching styles, if you are the individual that's doing most of the talking as the coach, that would be more coach centered at your sessions. If more of the athletes are engaging and communicating back and forth, having some say in decision making, are they the individuals that are more active participants in the sport coaching experience? That's going to be more player centered. So the sideline screaming, yelling coach who's making all the calls, that's going to be a bit more coach centered. And it truly is a spectrum. So the spectrum, at different times, you might shift more towards a coach centered approach and then back to a player centered approach. So what might be a time when maybe a more coach centered approach would actually be preferred or maybe more helpful? What do you think?
Baltimore, do you want to answer that? Do you want to take a stab at that? So maybe I can help out there, right? So something I do a great deal is open-ended questions, right? To pull answers out of my players, because that gets them thinking about different options, right? I always say, if anybody ever tries to push dogmatically, this is the way, kind of coaching on you, run away from that person as fast as you can, right? Um, so, it's open-ended questions that pull a lot of development out of the players when we're in practice, and I found that works quite a bit.
I said one of the comments back was maybe at 101. So I'm wondering if that's like a rugby 101 session. So if you have individuals that are brand new, don't have much of context for what the sport is, or say you're doing a high liability activity, it's the first time anybody's experienced it. So say something like, we're going into a segment where they're learning to tackle for the first time. That probably wouldn't be a time when you would say, what do you think you should do? Go ahead and try it, right? So that would be more of a player-centered approach. But at that moment, since they don't have the contextual knowledge or information or experience, that would be where you could push a little bit more information. So in the interest of safety or other elements of it. But I still think even in those segments, it doesn't hurt to have a conversation that is open-ended and using those questions to pull out the information that you eventually want to push their direction. So I think all of that goes back to what's the ratio of kind of talk time versus interactive time, which is really one of the hardest challenges of virtual learning or virtual information, because it tends to be more one-way communication. So I hope that answers some of it, but thinking about, is everyone included? Do they get time to socialize? Do they get time to know one another? That's more player-centered. Does everybody get the instruction that they truly need, right? So and every single group or program across the US has this challenge around, it's a great challenge to have. So you have your team, you're midway through the season, and all of a sudden 4 brand new incredible athletes show up, but they don't have any idea about rugby. So you're very excited about this, but now how are you going to thread them into your practice that they maybe showed up, 20 minutes late to because they just happened to walk up, they heard about it from their friend. So how do you make sure that everybody gets the instruction that they need based on their lived experience? And I think if you can find a way to be player-centered in those elements, it's really going to help. And the last one for me is all of those individuals at different levels of learning and experience. Have you created an opportunity for each individual to have a sense of achievement within the training sessions? So, and that I think is something that's truly brilliant, whether they're the person who's just walked up to the pitch for the first time in their life versus the individual that's in the US national player pool. How can you find that? And that's really where real magic happens, because you don't want some individuals kind of standing there waiting, and you don't want others being miles behind. So it's kind of finding that good balance.
Thank you. Questions from Austin Berg and Greg Faber may also be related. Austin asks, our team focuses on developing players that are completely new to rugby or to sports in general. How can we best get these players to develop their skills and learn the game without them getting too frustrated or feeling like they're letting the team down? Whereas Greg is asking, how do I assuage the fears of new players when they see a player injury during practice or a game?
That's an excellent series of questions. First and foremost, show respect for all. I mean, they showed up that day and they want to be a part of this sport. And we always talk about how rugby's for all and we're very inclusive, but how often do we typically form some cliques and some groups? And within our team, even within the sport itself, there's backs and forwards and how they identify, and how are we truly helping individuals that are new by shouting some terms at them that they have no context for what those mean. So making sure that when they arrive to training, that we're not speaking rugby speak right away to them, and we give time to explain what the terminology might be, because just knowing the language is important. So it's the language you use by being an inclusive group of individuals. So how we talk matters, and it's also just the words that are actually being spoken. So, and I think one of the best examples I had was I went to ultimate frisbee competition once, and I got to feel what it's like to be new to rugby, because all they did was shout a bunch of words I didn't understand. And I knew within 10 minutes I didn't want to come back. And then I had a realization after sitting in the car thinking I'm not coming back, that that's probably how a lot of rugby players feel, or brand new rugby players. So making sure we have those moments. Are we actually listening to individuals? Are we making time to show empathy for the fact that they're here for lots of reasons? And just in general, like, are we being kind? Are we being considerate about their needs? So going back to being player-centered, you have to actually get to know people to understand where their motivations come from. And making time for that is really valuable. So one of the things I think IGR does better than anyone is create social environments so that people can know one another. And I think that's really vital. And I wish that more programs across the board would understand the value of that in terms of helping new people and helping retention. I also think helping retention of new people is removing barriers. So that can be something as simple as the environment. So where are we actually training? Do people have access to get there? Is it, creating a carpool situation can really help people. And it also is time to be able to have conversations about how rugby goes. And if you're thinking more about activities at training, like how do we get new people up to speed and help them learn? play games as much as you possibly can. Small-sided games, play with multiple balls, play with different points of scoring, play with anything you can possibly come up with. A truly player-centered approach might be saying, hey, what sports have you played before? What activities did you enjoy in those training sessions? Let's see if we can turn that into something we do at rugby practice and just switch out the equipment. And if you do that, think about if people came from, say, basketball or hockey or something else, it's something they know. So if you start from somewhere that they know and you just change out the equipment or change out one of the context or the rules, then people feel more confident to go forward.
One of the things that I think, when we get lost in the X's and O's, is we forget that rugby ultimately helps us all become better human beings. And that's the main thing that at least I try to keep in mind. Katie, we have 5 more minutes. I'm just trying to see if anybody else has any other questions. And you mentioned some other things that we covered just a couple of minutes ago in a different session. Talking about carpooling and making sure that your pitch is accessible, right? Have you had players who had hearing loss or low vision or mobility issues or like physical disabilities whom you had to accommodate? How did you handle that?
One of my
or any other. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I find that has actually made me a far better coach, and I highly recommend it, is to coach in different language environments. So think about, if we talk about a player-centered approach being who does most of the talking. So if the coach is doing most of the talking, now put yourself in an environment where the language that you speak is completely different from the individuals that you have. So now it eliminates the ability to just talk a lot. So you now have to use other skill sets, right? So the ability to give really great demonstrations, which I think can go across the board, right? So if there is individuals with hearing impairment or anything like that, then maybe visibility is more of an important piece of it. So, and that's really going back to your teaching and coaching instructional skills. If all you do is a verbal form of instruction, then the individuals that need the kinesthetic approach or the individuals that need the visual or whatever it might be, they're going to have more of a challenge. So it's for you to sort of develop all of the tools that you have in the toolbox. And I find that, especially in different language environments, it's about trying to learn or make the effort to learn the language that is most commonly spoken. So even if, your pronunciations aren't great or whatever it might be, showing that you've taken the time to care enough to want to learn some terminology is the same of that conversation we just had around new people coming into rugby, when all we do is speak rugby back to new people. So I think that common language of understanding and empathy and truly wanting to work with individuals and just being excited and encouraging no matter what's going on, versus and probably the best language ever is the nonverbal. So are we looking frustrated or upset when the new player drops the ball for the 10th time, right? Versus are we actually looking like, hey, let's get our hands up and here's what we can do to provide some instruction so we can be useful.
I think the concept of meeting people where they are, or even just asking them to help you meet them where they are, is really huge. This is completely anecdotal, but the first time I learned what the word Maccabi, how it was pronounced, was way back in India, when India and Israel established diplomatic relations, and the soccer coaches from Maccabi Haifa were in Bombay teaching youngsters how to play, right? So that's how I learned how to pronounce the word Maccabi. But when I came here, there's a team in Boston called the Boston, and the way it's pronounced commonly is Maccabi. I was like, what? What are you? And so I ended up refereeing them in Stowe, Vermont. And the first question I asked them was, hey, when I address you on the field, do you prefer that I use the traditional Maccabi or the more commonly heard Maccabi? And they all just looked at me and they laughed and they said, that's the first time somebody's asked us that question. Thank you. And it helped me referee them a lot more easily when it's just a simple question, but it made a huge difference to them.
Right. Or just
So
the simplest one is I spent the entire first year of our program being a brand new collegiate women's program, watching a lot of match officials start with, I'm going to come here and teach you how to play the sport. And that was the pre-match chat. And, within 10 seconds, I'm like, these athletes are collegiate scholarship student athletes. They know how to play. You do your part. We're going to do ours. But it was the bias that the referees would bring in saying, oh, you're a new women's team, so I'm going to need to go over certain things. And so that was something that we talked about within our team. How do we manage the referee as well with that process? Because that's now taking 20 minutes out of our warm-up, right? So, and then we got better at that. And then instead of just being really frustrated and getting upset with that, it's really how do we communicate early and often so that they understand the context of where we're at. But also let's work on those like institutional biases so that we don't even have to have those conversations.
I mean, if you and I know you know about this a lot more than I do, but I have seen enough glaring examples of where the men's tournament has these lush green fields and the women's tournament has potholes in the ground and metal goalposts still stick. Like they're not even real like goalposts. I have no idea what the hell they are, but it's shredded glass on the field. And I think it was last year's NCAA women's basketball tournament that showed what their exercise room and their physio room was, and then but you had the side by side comparison with the men's tournament, and yeah,
And
that we both know
yeah, I
what
think the biggest difference is there's now just, people, in a respectful way, showing the differences, right? Making it visible. So the visibility is the most important piece of it. So when you think about everything that you would like to change in rugby, it's usually because of administrators that make decisions and make different calls around which fields should we be on. So where do those individuals get in those positions? It's because they've achieved a certain level of training and certification. So that's where I think the most important thing we can do is be visible within the training and certification realm, because that's how you find your way into places where decisions are made. So, at the end of all of it, it's just go for it, sign yourself up, be the individual that, puts their hand up to host. And when you do those things that are really good for the rugby community, they also pay themselves back to your program. And that's our program is now in its 5th year, and it's grown to the size where we have 3 full sides of a collegiate women's program. And a lot of that is just due to giving back to the community. So I say anything you can do to give back is going to give back to you and help your program grow.
I can't agree more. We'll take one last question. Austin asks, are there any coaching resources that you recommend?
Coaching resources. I'm a really big fan. Like some of the best stuff that I've seen for coaching inclusion is different international places. Like the Australian Sports Commission does a phenomenal job of looking at inclusive coaching practice. I would say everything from just using Google Scholar to other places that I really love to look are for other sports websites or other information that they might have. We often tend to kind of go, oh, I'm just going to look for rugby. But if you look at things like wrestling, or you look at other sports like hockey, anything that has a similarity, or even some that have nothing to do with anything that looks like rugby, or finding information from different fields like psychology or business management or whatever it might be. Because a lot of what we just talked about is things like, motivation, organization, and give me any team that has a phenomenal administrator. Like think about your people are going to come back to your program if it's organized, if they love being there, if it's simple for them to do. And all of those things have very little to do with the X's and O's of technical rugby information. So I find that where we have a big gap in the US is the dedication we put towards administrators and holding them up. So I think administrators are like the wheels that make everything turn. And if your administration skills are strong, you have good administrators, match secretaries, people who do all the dirty work, it's absolutely, those are who you want to learn from. So I would also say, go find the people in the community that you've seen that are the most organized and work on those skills as much as you do on your coaching skills, because I think that's vital to being a coach. I would say 15% of my day job as an NCAA college coach right now is actually coaching technical and tactical information. All the rest of it is administrative tasks. And the harder we work on those, the more the X's and O's just fall into place.
Awesome. Katie, I cannot thank you enough for participating in this and for sharing with us your skill set and your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was awesome.
We wish you and your teams the very best, and hopefully we can partner with you at future North American Championships or something. Charlotte, we're coming to Charlotte in 2 years in 2023 for the North American Championship. We would love it if you would join us for a clinic or something there.
Fantastic. I would love to. We do host, and anyone that is ever interested in coach training or education, we host them pretty much every semester. Or if you just want to reach out and say, how can I host it in my own area? I'm happy to answer those questions for you. Just send you the link and encourage you to just give it a try. It's going to be fun. Even if you have no clue what you're doing, that's okay. It's supposed to be like that. Like, just do the thing that scares you a little bit, because it's going to become something that's pretty normal every single year.
Thank you, Katie. Can't thank you enough for this.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye, Katie. Thank you, everyone.